I think in the end of the day, if I could ask people to reflect upon one thing and one thing only, is their relationship with themselves. That, we spend a lot of time building our businesses, we spend a lot of time focusing on strategies and AI and software and marketing and sales and all these different channels. And then when what's left, we tend to focus on those relationships at home. And a lot of us negate this one relationship, this most important relationship, I think, in the world, leaving God aside and religion, whatever you believe in, is our relationship with ourselves. A lot of entrepreneurs don't really like who they are. A lot of entrepreneurs give themselves a really hard time.
Philip McKernan, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I have a sense of what you do, right? But
Good, 'cause
I'm
I'm glad
I've
somebody
done some
does.
preparation. I have done some preparation. But I'd like to hear just in your own words, if you kind of meet someone who you've never met before, and they ask you, what do you do, Philip? What do you say to them?
Oh, it's difficult to put that into words. I mean, I could call myself a coach. I could call myself a professional speaker. I could call myself a dad, a husband, a human. I can go whatever way you want with it. But professionally, I think I'm a guide. I'm a mirror, and I create space everywhere in my life, whether it's professionally or personally, for people to just, I suppose, show up as themselves. But I suppose professionally, the easiest one is just call myself a coach, a facilitator. But I don't get caught up in labels. It's very, very difficult to describe what I do. And it has been for many people for many, many years.
What kind of people do you help, and what kind of people come into this kind of coaching world here?
Yeah, so 99 or 95% of our client base would be entrepreneurs, and the balance then would be sports people, specifically soccer players, football players. So I work with the professional team in the United States, and then I work with players in both the UK and Europe, and Canada and the United States. And that's more of a fun project, but about 95% of our client base is entrepreneurs from all over the globe.
We were speaking last night. We were at a dinner last night, and we kind of got matched opposite each other just as things would happen. And you said something that was really interesting about how, whether it's an entrepreneur or professional sports person, they all seem to come to you wanting the same thing, but oftentimes that's not maybe what they need or aligned with who they are. Could you talk a little bit more about that and just kind of explain that part of it?
Yeah, I think if I go back a little bit further, I think originally I think a lot of people come to me when there was a form of desperation. They were stuck. It's like a lot of people, particularly men, they go to the doctor when they're really sick rather than going to the doctor to be more preventative, etc. So back, many, many years ago, people used to come to me. They'd hit a bit of a crisis. They'd hit a crossroads, a health crisis, a financial crisis, a coming of age crisis, or whatever it happens to be. They'd come to me from a place of desperation. I think right now we have a much more sophisticated audience, in the sense that they're so much more self-aware, and they're coming because they want to be ahead of the conversation. So they don't, as an example, an athlete, they'll often wait till they hang up their cleats, or they get an injury, a career-ending injury, or that they retire, and then suddenly they go, and who the fuck am I now? And who am I going to be for the next 20 years? And therefore, there's nothing different between talking to a sports person or a seasoned entrepreneur in that regard, because a seasoned entrepreneur is still going to face the same milestone, whether their business is taken from them, whether they sell their business, whether their economic crisis happens, whether their business becomes irrelevant, or whether they decide to transition. So essentially, there is this new wave of clients that are coming to us saying, hey, I don't want to wait for life to show up and tell me who I'm going to be and what's going to happen. I want to be ahead of the conversation. I want to make sure I'm asking myself better questions today so I have no regrets tomorrow. So in that sense, they're looking for exactly the same thing. And the last thing I'll say is most of them think they want success, but what they need is other more fundamental, more meaningful things, like a sense of fulfillment, joy, meaning. And we all want to know that we mattered. We all want to know that we made an impact in the world. And unfortunately, most of us never bring our greatest work out into the world, and we die with that gift still inside of us. To me, that's a tragedy. And I'm here to prevent that for as many people as I can before I die.
How did that insight come to you? Is it Has it kind of been innate and something you just kind of came up with, whether it be nature or nurture, or have you had to kind of learn it the hard way? Did kind of certain circumstances make you learn that lesson?
Yeah, I think if I was to create a philosophy in life to be a professional or make money, I wouldn't have gone down the path I went down. I think there's lots of easier ways to make money, and I attempted to abandon who I was, excuse me, many times in the pursuit of money and pursuit of real estate. We were building a really successful real estate business, just before the crisis. And in a way, at the time when the financial crash happened, it devastated everything, all our plans. We lost every single penny and more. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And in hindsight, looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened, because I don't think I would have been strong enough and had the conviction at that time. I think I have it now to be able to let go of chasing money and to pursue what I do now. So for me, I think I was born with something, some innate gift, which might sound arrogant, but I really don't care because it's taken me 52 years to own it. And then I think through my own life experience, there's been something nurtured inside of me. And I'd love to say it all comes from a place of joy, but a lot of it came from a place of pain, a place of being so disconnected in myself, saying, doing, and being a person that I thought I needed to be to fit in, when in reality, there was a part of me that I didn't accept and it didn't show up. And so I think through that discomfort, I think in essence, I want to prevent that for as many people as I can. And I think that's part of my own individual purpose in the world.
How did you discover who you really are? And I ask because I think a lot of people would be feeling that sense of confusion in their own lives about, maybe they already have a sense of it, maybe they already kind of know, but whether it's I need to put food on the table or whatever it might be, how was it that you discovered that about yourself, really?
Well, when I discover exactly who I am in this world, Connor, I will send you a text message. So I respectfully would offer that I have discovered a lot more, but there is so much more that I have to discover about myself, or that to some extent I'll never discover about myself. And I think the most blind people in the world are the people who keep telling people how self-aware they are. I think that's complacency. I think that is a sense of arrival, and I think you're more lost than you can even imagine. So you will never, ever, ever hear me say I know myself fully or I'm deeply aware. I would like to think I'm more aware than I was 10 years ago. So to me, it's an ongoing journey. But I haven't had to do anything. I chose. I chose to go back and start at the beginning. And I remember doing therapy for the first time ever in Dublin many, many years ago. And I didn't even have the courage to do therapy because I needed it. I had to do it under the guise of, well, I'm just checking it out. Like, I'm just going to go and see what this is like. And I'll never forget, I'll tell you the story very quickly. I walked into this man's home. He operated from his home. He's a psychotherapist. And I walk in, he said, I'll grab you a cup of tea or coffee. And I said, great, so I'll have a cup of tea. And he says, go in and take a seat. And I walked into his living room, and there was two chairs at right angles. And one of them had, and this is my memory, and again, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. When I looked over, one of them had like what looked like a coffee table, a Kleenex coffee table. It was like a triple-decker Kleenex boxes, one on top of each other. And naively, I said to myself, Jesus, he must have a bad cold. So I sat in the other chair. Now, this is a long time ago, right? Slightly embarrassing, but that's what happened. And he walks in the door 5 minutes later with the tea, and he stops and he looks at me and goes, Philip, that's my seat. I went, all right, okay. And my body language was open. I remember being excited, not excited, but open. And as soon as I walked over and I sat in the other seat and I looked down at the coffee table, it just felt like a coffee table. There's so many Kleenex in the bloody thing. And I looked at the Kleenex and suddenly I contorted and I felt nervous and I twisted my body and I crossed my legs. And I was like, well, I'm not going to cry. I mean, if that's what this setup, this is bullshit. Like, I'm not going to cry. That's one thing is not going to happen. I'm not going to cry. And he sits down, he gives me my tea, and I think he said, tell me about your life, or something like that. And it took me, I'd say, 40 seconds before I burst into tears. Then I got incredibly angry. Then I got incredibly sad. Then I got really angry. Then I got sad. Then I got embarrassed. Then I got angry. And I remember walking out 45 minutes later, an hour later, thinking, what just happened? Where did all of that come from? And I remember bending over and putting my hands on my thighs. And I honestly, Connor, sorry for the graphics, but I was afraid to vomit because I thought if I puked up, every organ in my body was going to come out. And it was shocking to me how much emotion I'd had stored in my body that I had never addressed. And I thought I knew a little bit about myself. I had a fucking clue who I was. And that was the beginning of what I would call the real work. Okay. The real exploration into my life. And I would have thought my story was where I went to school, where I grew up, some of the things that happened that were good, some of the things that happened were bad. What I realized was a whole world in Philip McKernan that I had no idea what it was. And I'm still uncovering that to this day. And sometimes it's ugly and sometimes it's painful. But on the other side of all of that pain is a beauty or a potential and an access point. Because I cannot believe I do what I do professionally. I cannot believe. I'm still in shock of what I do and what I get to do in this world. And I think I'm being guided spiritually. I think I'm being helped by so many beautiful people. But I've also been courageous enough to delve into the corners of my life that I'd rather have not seen at one point or another.
Firstly, I'd say thank you, because I think for me anyway, at moments where I've been kind of most anxious, it's been it's been with this thought maybe of I'm not maybe being who I am, right? And I know exactly who I am. I can put it into a container, right? I'm not being that person. And I think the realization that that is a kind of a flexible, moving journey of self-discovery through one's whole life is a bit more freeing for people. It's a bit more freeing for me, I think.
Yeah, I hope so, because, I don't want to come across today as sitting here having it all figured out. But I remember a 60-year-old man, for his own gift, his own 60th birthday, he decided that he would travel to the west coast of Ireland from Canada and spend 7 days doing an immersive retreat that we created and designed many years ago. And in this particular event, what we do for a very intentional reason is we bring you back into your past with a very intentional, focused practice to understand who you are in a way that perhaps most people have missed so many steps. So you can understand how your life has emerged the way it is, and therefore you can begin to rewrite the narrative. Otherwise, the narrative has been written for you to some extent. And I'll never forget this one man, and it's a beautiful story in so many ways, and it's also, in some respects, tragic. He was 60 years old, and he told his story as if he was so free as a young boy. So we got a glimpse into his life, and he basically said, yeah, I was so free. I had so much freedom, and it was amazing, and it's so much freedom. And somebody made a comment saying, oh, here's Mr. Happy, not in a judgmental way, but going, I'd love to have had his life because it was so glorious, where somebody else in the room, had a much more maybe obviously traumatic life in some respects, okay? And he came to me one night and he said, Philip, he said, people are kind of saying, oh, I'm Mr. Happy and everything else. And, but I really have had an amazing life. Now, what I always witness with people like that is how many times he had to tell me he has had an amazing life. It was almost like he was only short of getting out a PowerPoint presentation to try to prove it to me. So if people keep telling me something that is true, it makes me curious about how true it actually is. And it's not that he's a liar and he's out of integrity. It was just that was the narrative he'd been telling himself for so long. 60 years he'd been telling himself a story. And he goes, what should I do with this? And I looked him straight into the eyes and I said, just question it. And he goes, what? I said, just question it. Just question, is the story you're telling yourself about your childhood, your adolescence, your teenage life, is it actually all true? And he stopped and he looked at me so profoundly because no one had ever challenged him, even though that was a gentle challenge. And the following morning he walks in and he sits down, he puts his hand up. And I said, you don't need to put your hand up in my room. And he said, do you remember the story about the bike, Philip? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I wasn't free. I was lonely. And with tears in his eyes, the realization for the first time in his entire existence that most of his early childhood was actually lonely. Now, what's the relevance to this conversation with you? What's the relevance to this in business? What's the relevance to entrepreneurship? It's all relevant, and I'll explain why in a minute. This overwhelming realization that the story he'd been telling himself about his life is simply not entirely the way he'd been positioning it. You fast forward that into the life that he inhabits today, 60 years later or 50 years or whatever period of time he was talking about. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to create the opposite of loneliness. So he's trying to control his life and set his entire life. So most of his decision making is to move away from a feeling that he doesn't want to recreate in his life. Is that dysfunctional and wrong? No. However, it means that he's created a life that's not an authentic representation of who he is. He's created a life based on what he doesn't want rather than creating a life based on what he does want. So one is from a place of scarcity and the other way of living is abundance. And what he'd realized is that he's created another island, or he's imprisoned himself and he's created the same thing again. And he was able to go back to Canada and make fundamental changes, not just in his office, but in his own home, to create connection and to share that story with his loved ones. And the reason I share that story is a classic example of someone thinking they know their story, but knowing one variation of the story, but not really knowing what it meant to them.
Tell me about the real estate company, because I think, and I heard you on another podcast recently talking about the kind of drive to set it up and the kind of excitement maybe around having some external success and it working, and then suddenly it not working. And could you just talk to me a little bit about that story? And because I do think it kind of it underpins what kind of came next,
Yes.
which is the coaching and everything else. So just in your own words, what was that like, and how did it go?
Yeah, so basically I'd got an opportunity to go to Canada. I believe the sequencing, if I look back, is something pretty much around this, is that I got an opportunity to speak on stage, which was a real eye-opener for me, but I got an opportunity to see the Canadian real estate market. And at the time, everyone in Ireland was going crazy looking for real estate. They were going to the Black Sea. They were going to, Eastern Europe, where there wasn't much exit strategy. Common law wasn't even in place at the time. In terms of kind of recurring revenue from properties, rental markets, there was a lot of challenges in it. I go to Canada, which is English speaking, common law, developed country, and I'm looking at this place going, holy shit, no one in Ireland knows like how much potential there is here. And it was like somebody just invited me over, pulled up a shutter and said, here's what's on sale, and it's epic. And I remember thinking about, okay, so I think the underlying narrative, which I'm looking back in hindsight, looks clear. At the time, it didn't feel clear. Is I think this is a driver at the time for me, and that was when I make enough money, then I'll give myself and I'll have the freedom to go and do what I really want to do in the world. Okay. And what I used to tell myself was I didn't know what that was. Partially because that's true, and partially is bullshit because I didn't have the fortitude or the courage to actually sit down with a piece of paper and actually say, well, if I did know, what would it be? And I'm really good at helping people draw out of them. What is that? What is that thing they know deep down they need to do, but for whatever reason they're getting in their own way? So I think that narrative was driving a dysfunction inside of me. So I was chasing money, even though at the time I didn't think it. And we basically put a plan together. We did a couple of presentations in Dublin, and suddenly this thing started to gather legs way faster than I expected, like way faster. And I think it was a combination of a couple of things, the combination of the opportunity, a combination of the desire in the market, a combination of the fact that on the ground we had a really good team, and the combination is, I think in certain circles, I had a degree of trust with people where they trusted me. And before I knew it, people weren't going, no, I don't want to put 20 grand in. One guy said, I want to put $500,000 in. There's suddenly a well-known accountant in Dublin came and said, we want to put a fund together. Before I knew it, 6 months later, we're looking at raising 20 million. One of the big institutions came. They were talking about mega money, which I don't think we're in a position to help. So suddenly this thing just started to explode. And we basically kind of put everything on hold and said, no, we need a bigger plan here. We need tax strategies. We need a whole vehicle here. So we spent a shit ton of money putting a brand together, putting the legal structure together, putting a whole kind of offshore mechanism to channel the funds through in a legal manner and in a tax advantageous way. And we were kind of doors open, ready to rock and roll within 6 weeks. And then suddenly the financial crisis hit, and it did happen very fast in Ireland. And we were basically left holding this whole thing that we had built and putting all of our money into it, all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. And then the lights turned off. And the market in Canada, we were 100% right, by the way, 150% right. The market ended up doing extraordinary things, really safe. But the problem is the funds were all going to be coming from Ireland, and those funds weren't available, and people shut down and everything else. So we were left owing hundreds of thousands to the banks with our own real estate that we'd owned in Ireland, having spent every penny we had building a business and doing it right to make sure that if we took funds, investment dollars and investment euros from Ireland, that it would be protected and safe. And it was over before it started, really. I mean, we'd invested some funds, but it was gone. So I felt like a total failure. The banks were calling me looking for money. My big plan was shot. And then from there, I went straight into coaching from a place of pure desperation, not to raise money because it's, again, we were in a country we knew nobody. So I'm in Canada. And I knew nobody in business really there. And I just said to my wife, we're in my mum's kitchen. I think we had 200 euros in the bank. And I said to her, are we going to go back to Canada? She said, no. And I said, why? She says, because it's not working. And then I looked her in the eyes and I said, right, fuck it, we're doing this coaching thing. And she said, done, let's go. And that was the thing I'd wanted to do for 20 years.
Do you think that that moment saved you a little bit? Because you said there that the market in Canada did do incredibly well. Okay, so had the money, had you had it all kind of organized and almost in there before everything came out, you probably would have done very well financially, and you may not have come back to this coaching thing, well, certainly not as soon as you did. I'm just wondering, do you kind of look at that as a kind of a sliding doors moment a little bit for you?
100%. I honestly don't think I would have stepped in to the extent that I stepped into coaching, running retreats, speaking all over the world. I just wouldn't have done that. And I would have probably gotten to it at some point, but I would have hidden behind the success of the real estate. But deep down, no matter how much success I had and how much money I made, no matter what mountain I climbed, it would never have been enough. It would never have been enough. There would have been this deep kind of unsettled feeling inside of me, which I think most entrepreneurs have, that busyness simply is not the antidote to. And I think what we do is when we start to feel that feeling, it feels uncertain, it feels like it's pulling me in the wrong direction. We double down on what we're doing and we get busier and busier and busier. And we can't outrun that feeling because that's our truth. That's the essence of who we are. So I don't think I would have stepped in. I think it would have been a major distraction. And that would have been convenient because I was scared shitless to do coaching. I was scared shitless to put myself out there in the world. I was scared shitless to stand on stage. And yet, and I'm still scared. To this day, I spoke in front of 800 people really recently at a conference in the US, and my heart was pounding as I was about to get on stage, and cameras and lights, and it's just like it's a weird thing because I feel I'm the accidental speaker. That was never part of my destiny, at least one that I could conjure up. That's for sure.
I heard you also say in that interview that your gut has never led you astray, and that, kind of in hindsight looking back, your gut was telling you coaching, speaking. And but you were kind of moving in this direction, chasing money as you put it a few moments ago. I suppose for people that you come across and you're doing coaching with, they might not have, in some ways, I'm going to use the word lucky, but they might not be as lucky to have this massive failure whereby almost their back is to the wall and it's like, well, I might as well do the coaching thing. How do you see people come out of maybe a moderate or a great success? Maybe their version of Canadian real estate has done really well, but it's not really aligned with who they are. How do people move from that? How have you seen people move from that into what they really want to do?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, and I think it's another way of framing the question maybe and thinking about it is when you meet a business owner who kind of knows deep down there's something off, there's something missing, that there's something they can't quite put their finger on, and it's hard if they like what they do. It would be easier if they just fucking hate their business, they hate their industry, they hate their people, they hate their boss, they hate their team, whatever. I think when they like what they do, and they're good at what they do, it's very difficult to transition because they don't have a lot to leave. They have to leave a lot behind in essence. But I would argue that I think we're very good when like imagine we brought 5 business owners into this room, we sat them down and said, right, we want all of you to transition from your business in one form or another. Either transition part-time, take some space out to do something that's really passionate, lights you up, sell your business, give your business away, do a management buyout or whatever. And you'd have varying degrees of fear and everything else that will come up. And some of them will be basically going, well, a lot of them will focus on, well, I don't know what's next. And but ask them, well, what's the downside of you transitioning from your business? Oh my God, my team. I mean, without me, my team won't survive. And I could jeopardize my mortgage at home and my wife or my husband or my kids. You know, we have a really amazingly clear narrative of how things are going to go to shit if we make a change in life. I think we've chapters almost written in our heads about how much risk is on the table. Very few of us understand the cost of not changing. What if you don't change? What if nothing happens? So an opportunity for a question right now to anyone listening to this now or in the future is, if you stay doing what you're doing professionally, just as an example, for the next 20 years and then you die, just before you die, before you walk out in front of that bus, before that bus hits you, are you going to have some regret? And if the answer to that question is most likely yes, then there is something you're simply not getting to today. If we brought that into marriage, imagine, Connor, you said to me today, so you're married. You say, yeah, I'm married. How long are you married? 20 years. Do you think in 20 years, Philip, you might have some regret about staying with your wife? If my answer to that question is yes, that means I have a problem today. Not a problem in 5 years, not a problem in 10 years, a problem today. There's something in my relationship I'm not addressing. So it is easier if someone hates what they do. If someone has success and does really well, it's even harder for them to think about any type of transition because their identity is so tied, and often our values are so tied to what we do in business. And then we have society applauding us for this achievement, looking to us to help them, to educate me to do the same thing. It's very, very difficult. However, and I'll finish with this, I've worked with some of the richest men and women on the earth. So there's one of the richest families in America. They brought me in to do some work. I've had a privilege of sitting in extraordinary situations, working with families who are very, very wealthy, working with individuals who have done extremely well. And there comes a point that if they have made that wealth doing something that doesn't light them up, there is always a point in that journey that comes where they wake up and go, shit, it's simply not enough. There's something I didn't get to. There's something I haven't done. There's an itch that I haven't scratched. And it inevitably shows up, whether it's through a health crisis, a loss of a loved one, age, whatever it happens to be. And to me, I think that's the place where I think the last thing I'll say is this, is that I think the opportunity is to do something in the world that makes a bigger impact in the world. And another entrepreneur scaling a business and selling it for 60 million euros and then doing it again and doing it again, doing it again. Yes, they can use that money for good. But I think that's not what the world needs anymore. The world needs really smart entrepreneurs using their ideations to make the world a better place.
Why is it so hard, do you think, for us as humans to get this into our heads? Because the even when you were saying there, selling a company for 60 million and doing it again and selling another one, there's an intoxicating feeling. There's something about that we can get drawn into it. And you kind of mentioned there, like, society will applaud you for doing something like that, for making a lot of money for yourself. Maybe it might not even have done anything really good for society. It might just have been a Me Too, could have been, I don't know, right? But I think most humans almost have a natural feeling of, oh yeah, success, money, happiness, right? But it's clearly not true. And everyone who's ever made that much money has said it didn't make me happy. And I think what the feeling is for most people is that can't, no, you're only saying that now because you've made X amount of money, right? But actually that's the confusion, because either every single one of those people is lying, And they are just saying, oh, like money doesn't actually really matter. Like once you have it, you'll realize why is that so hard for people? And why is it that people have that feeling that you had of, I'm okay, fine, that's all great. I do want to be who I am, but I'm going to make money first. And that's, that's going to free me up to do it. Why is that?
I'm not sure I have the answer to that question, to be honest with you. I think there's so many variations in that, but I think one of the very basic fundamentals around that is just simply our relationship to money. I mean, where we put money. My son asked me a question about success the other day, and I said, well, let's qualify success before we have this conversation. Like, what is success to you? Because there's no point in me talking about success unless you understand what your definition is and mine is, and then challenge each other's, etc. So again, let's just go back. Let's say we have 5 entrepreneurs in the room, 5 business owners in the room, and we said, what is if you were to distill in one word how you feel about money, not what you think about it, not what you aspire it to be, not what you think the word should be, not the word you want it to be, but if you were to truly close your eyes, put your hand in your belly, feel into the energy of money, how would you? What one word would you use to describe that? And here's what's going to happen. In a room of 5, a room of 5,000, I've done this many, many times around the world. You'll have everything from freedom to hate to, there's not enough. There's like a sense of abundance, opportunity, fear, entrapment, etc. So you'll have all of these words. And what most of us would think is you get all the quote unquote negative words like fear or inadequacy or whatever, and put them in one side of the room and go, you're the ones that are all fucked around money, and get all the people that think it's like all words like freedom, opportunity, potential, tool, it's just energy, whatever those words are, and put them on the other side and applaud them and go, and you've got a really good relationship with money. But here's the reality. Both sides of the room have got deep dysfunction written into the very DNA of the words they've used. So if someone's sitting there and going, my one word around money is fear, and someone over here is, my one word about money is freedom, they feel they need money to be free, and the other person feels that they're going to be screwed without it. There is no such thing as this person has a better relationship to money than this person. It's equally dysfunctional from different perspectives. And the story I had for years, when I make enough money, I will then have the freedom to go. And I was putting money on a pedestal, and I was giving it way too much power. And I can blame society, because a lot of the gurus and the teachers and everything else, they promote this idea. But also that was my choice. I didn't dig deep enough, and I didn't want to hear the story that actually money doesn't bring happiness, because I was saying that's bullshit. That's easy to say. I'd rather have the money and decide for myself whether it brings happiness or not. I'm worth a lot more money today than I've ever been. And I can tell you right now that when I look back and I think about the greatest joys in my life over the last 10 or 50 years, not one of them have anything to do with money, really. So I don't know exactly why, but I think it starts with our relationship to money and where we place it in life, and how much power we give it. And I think by giving money power, we deeply, deeply, deeply disempower ourselves in that process.
Talk to me a little bit about that. So taking the leap for you, in a way, maybe you felt like you didn't have any other options, right? And you followed that path, and as a result, you feel like you have more money, say, than you ever need, or you have enough, or whatever you want to say about it. That path can be tricky to walk for people who might feel that the thing that they really feel like they want to do in their lives isn't going to give them. Maybe someone wants to work for the government. Say someone wants to be a teacher, right? And they know that there's a set amount of money that's going to give me for my life. That's truly who I am. But I worry that I'm not going to have the life for myself and my family. Do you come across things like that at all?
Yes, I do. And I think just when I go back to I went into coaching from a place of desperation, I want to be very clear, not because I thought it was going to be an easy way to make money. Though I'm smart enough to realize there's lots of easier ways to make money than starting a coaching business in a country where you know nobody. Like I was in Canada, we didn't have a mechanism over there for networks or anything like that. So the desperation came from being so desperate, having lost everything. And the desperation really came from ignoring my gut for the last 20 or the previous 20 years. So that was the kind of desperation. I stand on stage and I speak to, in some cases, thousands of people, sometimes it's dozens. I get to run retreats this coming year in Iceland, Japan. I'm doing a Everest Base Camp trip with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs fly to the castle on the west coast of Ireland. I have a mastermind that I run. I'm getting somewhere with this. I'm not here just to promote my work. And I get to do all of these incredible things. Okay. And if you took a snapshot in a day of my life, you might go, well, it's easy for you to sit there with that microphone in front of your mouth and have all these opinions and everything else. And people tend to forget when Mel Gibson, or pick any actor you want, you see them in Braveheart, you see them in the final kind of product, you see them at the top of their career. But what you tend to neglect or not want to see is when Mel Gibson was serving a drink or polishing a floor in a hotel where Robert De Niro was walking across with Michelle Pfeiffer. I'm just making this up. And you don't realize that actually Mel Gibson was probably lifting, stage material at the back. And then he was in a scene, and then he was in a scene later on. And then maybe he did a nude scene that he'd rather buy the rights to 20 years later because he doesn't want that out there in the world. We tend to forget about the journeys that people made. And lots of people come to me and go, how do I do what you do? Or how do I build a life? Or how do I get on that stage? And when we get into it, there's a couple of real fundamentals. First, they want the end product, which, by the way, I'm not the end product. I'm far from it. I've got years and years and years of work and potential and effort to put into my life and discovery before I even reach my potential. I'm not even close yet. So they come and they ask that question and they make an assumption that I'm at some place. Second is they put me on a pedestal, which is wrong because I'm not a god and I don't deserve to be treated like that. And third is they're unwilling to examine their lifestyle. So they go, I'd love to set up a coaching business, but I got to make 200 grand doing it, or 50 grand, or 80 grand, or 700 grand, whatever it is to go. Why do you need to make that money? Well, that's the lifestyle I have right now. I worked with Google for 20 years. I want to go out and be a coach. I'm not sure I can make it, which basically equals they're not sure they're good enough to be that person. But I want to make sure I don't lose my lifestyle. So tell me, what is your lifestyle? Well, I'm driving a Tesla. I'm living in a cul-de-sac, 3-bedroom, semi-detached. I go to Mexico once a year. I go skiing once a year. And you're going, oh, right. So it's conditional. You want to protect your lifestyle. And then you want this thing that you say is your passion to make sure it maintains that. The difference between somebody who's been put on this earth and destined to do something versus somebody who thinks they want to do something is you're willing to live in the fucking streets to do what you do. I would live on the street to do what I do. And I know that about me because when we were broke and we got our first 10,000 euro check or dollar check, I was in Canada. We were on the floor financially. My wife said, somebody just dropped 10 or amount of money in the bank account. She turned the computer to me and I remember looking at it and said, great. It was the most money we'd ever been paid for one thing. And I went, great. Did you send that email yesterday? Or did you send that email about that thing we talked about? And she goes, God, you really don't give a shit about the money. And I said, no, this is about impact. And this is about me doing what I know I'm on this earth to do. And this stupid statement that I used to think was stupid, do what you love or do what you're put on this earth to do and the money will follow. I used to say, what a ludicrous statement. Unfortunately, yet again, I was proved wrong. But there is some truth to that. And I'd love to have a conversation, Connor, very briefly about why do most people never get to experiment and what I would argue is they're destined to put on this earth to do is that we would rather fail doing something we don't really want to do. It's a form of self-protection than run the risk of failing doing something that we know we've been put on this earth to do. The pain of that is too big for many of us to handle. So the other way I would say it is you walk into a bar and there's 2 women, 2 men, pick your choice. There's 2 women at the bar and one you've been in love with for 25 years. You grew up in high school with her, national school with her, and you've always loved her, but you've never ever asked her out on a date. And the other girl on the left is you've just met her a couple of weeks ago. I think most of us would like to think we'd ask the girl on the right, but clearly we haven't for the last 20-something years. We'd ask the girl on the left for a date because if she rejects us, it doesn't destroy us. But if the girl on the right rejects us, it's just too big a pain point. And I think that's the same case for the work that we do in the world.
So do you advise people, and I'm going to use the word advice kind of just, I know that You're a member of Entrepreneurs Organization. I know advice is almost a dirty word, and I know that in coaching, you're kind of more pulling it out of people, right? Say than giving advice. But I suppose I'm asking: is it take the leap and see where you end up, in your view, or is it make some practical steps towards that doesn't make you end up on the street?
It's about readiness. It's about readiness. So if somebody's listening to this podcast that just all they're focused on right now is scaling their business, they probably are not even listening to this part of the podcast because they've already checked out. This is not for them. And what they'll probably do is they'll just say, obviously, it's not for me. I'll come back to this podcast interview in about 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years. Or 2 is they've already judged it. And one of the reasons we judge so severely is because we don't want to hear a message. Okay? Or maybe 3, they just don't align with who I am. Maybe I've got a weird accent. Maybe it's the way I'm saying it. Maybe I'm just a weird puppy. I don't know. But depending on where you're at, if you honestly want to, so the analogies I would use is mountains. So I'm a big mountain guy. I've my first mastermind 20 years ago was Everest. My first workshop ever was called Base Camp. So I've been using mountain analogies forever. And I know there's been a book called The Second Mountain in recent years. It's not a play on that necessarily. I haven't even read the book, but the way I look at it is there's mountain 1, mountain 2, mountain 3. Mountain 3 is the work, I believe, the greatest work we'll ever do. Mountain 1 is all about survival. Mountain 1 is all about me, as in you. It's about getting our shit together. So if someone is saying they live in an apartment in Dublin, their goal and their dream is to buy a house, I'm not going to argue whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it can create a sense of entrapment. But they're all about survival. Don't even think about your third mountain right now. Just get your shit together, figure it out. Get the mortgage, get the payment, do anything, do any type of work, just to get it going. Mountain 2 is when you start thinking about building something in a business context, a business owner, an entrepreneur, and they can be quite different in some respects, but you're building something together. That's an us energy. So it's me to us. And then I think there's an opportunity, and I don't believe every human should do this, by the way. Mountain 3 is all about them. How do I dedicate the rest of my life to helping humanity in one form or another? And that transition I don't think it's for everybody. I think everyone has the potential to do it, but I don't think it is for everybody. So what I'm talking about, this is not for everybody, because some people simply are not at a place where they are prepared to step out into the world and run the risk. They would rather execute their talents and get applauded in society for doing so and getting well paid. And that's okay. There's no judgment from me whatsoever. But many of those men and women die with their greatest gifts still inside them, and the world doesn't get to experience that. And that to me is the tragedy. I'm only here to work, Connor, for the rest of my life with people who want to bring their gifts out into the world. When they know that they've had a taste of success, they know deep down there's something more. It could be a podcast, it could be a book, it could be a speech, it could be a coach, it could be a writer, it could be a mentor. It doesn't have to be full-time. And when you're ready to make that transition, then come and speak to me. Then take a risk. And going back to your original question, so it depends where you are on that journey, what mountain you're on. And are you prepared to die in the second mountain where most entrepreneurs die? They overstay their welcome in the second mountain. That's my experience. They get stale and they don't reinvent. So readiness is a huge part of it. And then finally, do you take the leap? Again, readiness is part of that. I would be a complete and utter hypocrite if I sat here today and said, oh no, don't take the leap. Do it really gently, experiment and everything else. Yes, do that. I love experimentation. I think it's a brilliant way to try things. But I think the Vikings had something right. They would get to land, burn their ships, so there was no way back out. And I think when you make a leap, the universe is watching. It's watching. It tests you. It dangles a carrot to draw you away. And if you stay the course and if you've got conviction, then the universe presents you with the whole fucking cake. Not just the crumbs, the whole cake. In other words, it gives you opportunities that ordinarily didn't exist. I'm a dyslexic kid from a village in Ireland. How in God's name do I stand in the Pentagon? How do I work with Olympic teams? And this is not me blowing my own trumpet. How does that happen? I'm not that good, Connor. I can't be that good. How do I get to do what I do? I get to do what I do because I have a conviction towards humanity. I have a love and I have an empathy that runs so deep because I know what it's like to betray yourself. And then people watch and then I get a call. Hey, McKernan, I want you on my podcast. Today is such a privilege for me. I'm sitting in Ireland, a country I left. I felt I needed to leave to figure out who I was. Talking to you and getting an opportunity to share what I believe in the world, what I see in the world. I get to stand on stage. Like, what a privilege. But it won't happen unless you've got conviction. The only reason I'm sitting here is because there's some part of you, maybe you've regretted now, it says this guy has something to give to humanity. Otherwise, you wouldn't have me here because you're a very considerate, thoughtful human being. So when you have conviction and you go out into the world and you believe what you believe and you say it out loud and you stop hiding, visibility is one of the scariest things for humanity. And you stop hiding and you stop making it about you, you will get breaks. Like a publisher said, having a pee in a toilet after getting off stage. And guy says, I think we should talk. And I went, can we talk outside? And he goes, yeah. And we walk outside. He said, that talk was absolutely unbelievable. And I said, well, thank you. And he said, I think we should write a book together. And I said, I'm dyslexic. And he goes, I know, we'll build a whole team around you. And I said, who are you? And he said, my name is such and such. And I work with John Wiley, which is one of the biggest publishing companies in the world. And he basically stuck to his word. And when I asked him, I said, why me? He said, because you had a conviction and a dedication and a passion and a love for humanity. And he said, I couldn't not. I didn't have to put a book proposal together. I didn't have to call him. He came to me. Everything great that's happened to me has come to me. Everything I chase is a fucking chase.
I'd be interested to ask you, and I'm actually a little apprehensive to ask you about this, but I have a feeling that you're not going to mind. In preparation for this, I saw you were on London Real 10 years ago or something like that, which is a podcast that was very popular at one stage. I don't know where it went, but it was very popular at one stage. I remember listening to it, and it was funny because I was like, wow, he was on London Real. Let me have a look at this. And there was a clip of you publicly setting an intention that you would like to be the president of Ireland in 20... No, I am sorry for bringing this up, but I go, if anyone's going to be okay about this, it'll be Philip. So I'm going to bring it up because I am interested, right, in what you think about this. When I saw that, first thing I thought was, wow, very brave, because it's so difficult to say publicly what you want, especially if it's something that other people might consider to be above your particular pay grade or whatever it might be, right? That's very difficult. And I've always had trouble saying what I want, right? Whether it's a lack of assertiveness or whether it's I don't want to get negative feedback, I'm not sure why it is. But I thought, first of all, very brave to say that. And secondly, I thought, I wonder, in the 10 years that's passed, because to my knowledge, you're not the president of Ireland yet, but perhaps that's still something you want to achieve, or perhaps it's not. Do you see it as a failure that you're not the president of Ireland? And you gave an exact year. You said 2025, and there's so much out there about setting intentions and the universe will conspire if you kind of put it out there. And I'm just wondering how you see that now. Is it, it wasn't really who I was, it wasn't really what I wanted at the time? Or do you see it as, it's still what I want, but it hasn't happened yet?
That's such a, I cannot believe you found that clip. I am stunned.
It's the first clip that came up for me.
That's
when I typed
incredible.
in your name into YouTube, it's the first thing that came up.
So I think if you put into YouTube, Philip comes out or Philip coming out or something like that, this clip. So that was at an event. It was one of the very first speaking events. I think it was the very first speaking event I'd ever done, which was recorded. And there's a story about that with my mum, if we want to circle back. It's a funny story. And it also is a little bit of an insight into the Irish psyche. And I can't remember exactly how the question came about, but I remember standing on stage and I talked about the importance of creating declaring publicly what it is that you want to do or who you want to become, and sharing it publicly, at least with one human being. And that was the basis of the book. I wrote a book called One Last Talk. And the idea is that you share the one last talk you'll ever give before you die. And we ran it in all these cities around the world. But the importance is declaring that, putting that story out into the world so you disempower or you empower yourself doing it. And I remember asking the audience to think about what they would say publicly. And some fucker in the room shouted, well, what's yours? And you can see clearly this was not part of the plan. And I'm really awkward. I said, no, it doesn't matter. It's stupid or whatever. And I haven't watched the clip. I haven't watched the clip for years. And then he goes, oh, no, it is. And I said, no, like it doesn't matter. It's just a stupid thing. And I was like discounting and everything else. And then finally I said, oh, screw it. And I said, I think this is how it went down. I said, screw it. I said, I want to be the president of Ireland. And the room absolutely erupted. And you don't even hear it on the video to some extent, but like the room went bananas and I got a standing ovation. a standing ovation in Canada in front of 500 people. So what was going on there? Well, thanks for the heads up around this, Connor, because I feel like I need to go to a dental appointment or something right now. So do I feel like a failure that it hasn't happened? No, I do not. Absolutely do not. Did I want that at the time? Absolutely. I have a love for this country. I adore this country. When I think about this country and the people of this country, I literally start to get like really get emotional. And at the same time, I felt I had to leave this country, not through no fault of its own. But we have an inbuilt dysfunction in this country about success. We have one of the reasons I would offer, I'm not here to coach you, but it's not because you have an inability to share what it is that you want publicly, because you're not in an environment that necessarily promotes that. And I'll give you an example. I remember writing my very first book, publishing with the guy from the toilet, publishing the first book and putting it on Facebook. Now, maybe I was looking for a gold medal. Maybe I was looking for red carpets. Maybe I was looking for my ego to be beautifully massaged and reflexology on my ego and everything else. But I remember putting it out and I was really proud and I was so fucking scared. There's something really scary about putting out a book, putting out a speech, putting out a podcast, putting anything out into the public for ridicule or for compliments. And I remember hundreds of comments from Canada and America saying, oh my God, so proud of you. What an achievement. And the people who knew me well going, and the fact that you're dyslexic, writing a book, what an achievement. One comment from Ireland. And do you know what it said? Now, don't get too big for your boots.
Which, in a way, sums up the Irish psyche to a degree.
Absolutely.
And I know we always say it. We say we're kind of a nation of begrudgers. But I don't know, it must be a deep-rooted cultural thing.
And I remember meeting, there's a guy who you and I both know, I'll just use his first name, Ted. And I've got to know him well, and he's such a brilliant, brilliant human. And he's just such a lovely guy. And but he was one of the honest ones with me. He said the first time he met me at a social gathering, an entrepreneurial gathering, he said, and who the fuck is your man? Who's this guy? I get judged by so many people because I think I just show up with an air, a confidence, who I am. And, you know, people judge me very quickly. And all I would say is, give me a chance, get to know me before you're too busy judging me. But anyway, going back to the presidency thing, very few people have ever asked me why I wanted it. Because I want to make an impact in this country. I left the island of Ireland because I felt I needed to let go of the scaffolding that was around me to understand who I was. And I was right, because I discovered a lot more about myself. Because in a country where you know everybody, they know you to be a certain person and they know you in a certain way. And again, if we were in a room of 100 people, I would say raise your hands if you've got members of family, at least one, if not many, who want you to be happy. Raise your hand. Most people would raise their hand. Keep your hand raised if they want you to be happy, but they just don't want you to change too much. Most of the hands would remain held high, meaning we want people to be happy, but we don't want them to change too much. As they change too much, it rocks our perspective and our world around them, and it gets us to examine our own lives. So what I want to do is I want to make an impact in this country. I'm back on the island of Ireland 5.5 years. We've spent restoring a castle on the West Coast. And there's something about the prophet, and trust me, I'm not calling myself a prophet, but there's a saying, the prophet is not welcomed or known in his own land, or something like that. And there's some real truth to that. However, the Irish have changed. We've been humbled. We've realized we don't have all the answers. We realize that asking for help is okay. We realize that coaching, therapy, whatever it happens to be, is actually a good thing. That we don't have all the answers. We're not meant to figure it all out together. And working together means that we can achieve more. So I'm back here and I am willing to step in. At that time, I felt that I needed money to be successful. I didn't step into sport because I thought I needed to be a psychologist, and dyslexia meant I didn't go to college, didn't do anything academically. And I also think I needed an office and something where people would respect me in order to create the space for them to listen and to step in. What I now know about the presidency, at the time, it wasn't that political. It wasn't put under a microscope like it has the last election. To me, was disgusting what they did to rolling people over the coals and examining their personal lives to the extent the way they did. I don't want any part of that. I don't want any part of politics. It's not my battle. It's just not my battleground. My battleground, and I think this is something else I'd love to offer people to think about. Somebody accused me one day, said, "Are you racist?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "I haven't seen you put anything out about Black Lives Matters." This is a number of years ago in the United States. And I said, "I've never seen you put a post out about Northern Ireland." "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Because you believe in Black Lives Matters doesn't mean I don't believe in it. I just don't believe it to the extent that you do. You're a huge advocate for it. It affects you personally. I think we would be so much better off not giving a shit about other things, but picking the battle that stirs us so deeply and going deep on that. My job is to awaken entrepreneurs to the gifts they have inside them, to do their greatest work, and to do it through the lens of making an impact in the world. That's going to change the fucking world. Me being in office as president, now in hindsight, I don't think it will make a big enough impact. Will I coach presidents? Will I work with them? Will I support them? Absolutely. But me being in that office was more about my insecurity and my ego rather than who I am today.
You hosted a retreat for the Entrepreneurs Organization in Clare, in the Burren region, basically in Clare. And we had an amazing guy in, I can't remember his name, but he gave us the whole history of
Brendan, yeah.
amazing. And just to the, like, I do not care about landscape, but I was fascinated, and I was just so kind of enthralled and taken in by the passion this guy had for the Burren and what it meant to him. And you said something after that. You said that you had been in Edmonton in Canada, and at one stage you just said, "I just have to get out of here." You said to your wife, I just need to leave." And you left, and I believe you went to, where did you go after that?
Vancouver.
And that kind of changed your whole outlook or your mood. And I was kind of thinking about it there when you said about Ireland and your environment and how that might be impacting. Could you just impacting our emotions, or whatever you want to call it? Could you talk a little bit about that change, what it meant to you and what you learned from it?
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, Brendan Dunford, he's an advocate for the Burren, the landscape of the Burren. He's done incredible things down there. I think it just shows and it illustrates a point, and that is you don't care much for landscape or some variation of that comment, and yet because you were in a room and you witnessed somebody so passionate about something, it drew something else out of you, and that's the power of have conviction and passion about something, and how we can help move other people and discover something about themselves. For me, the place we live is so incredibly important. The place, the environment in which we wake up in, whether it's a physical home or whatever, but particularly where the home is. And hopefully you live in a home, not a house. And I think that's another thing which we don't have to get into, is a lot of people live in houses, they don't live in homes. And the place that we live has such an impact. So I often have business owners will come to me and say, "Hey, I'm scaling a business, I'm growing a business, but I'm realizing that an entrepreneur wants to scale their business. A brave entrepreneur is how I define the people we want to work with. Is somebody who wants to scale their business in alignment with who they are, and they also want to scale their life with it. Because a lot of us scale our business, look around, they go, "Holy shit, that cost a lot in terms of my dynamics, my relationships, etc." And they'd often say, "I want you to help me scale a business, but make sure that I scale me as a leader to make sure I can bring this business to where it needs to go." And I go, "Where are you going to do that?" Las Vegas. I go, "Do you like Las Vegas?" "Oh God, I hate the place." I go, "So you want to scale, you want to start, grow, scale a business in a city you don't want to live?" "Yeah, and the problem with that is," and I go, "The problem with that is everything. Why would you start a business in a city you don't want to be?" And they'll say it's temporary. And again, this is slightly, I'm making this analogy up, but they say, "Well, it's only a 5-year, I'm going to be in that 5 years." And good luck with that thought process, because the finish line often changes, and before you know it's 10 years, 15 years. I would argue no matter what you create in a position, in a place you don't want to be, is never going to be enough. That the very foundation of it is flawed. That you're coming into a place where you simply cannot bring your best work alive in a place you do not want to be. So if something's not working for you and you feel off, there's 3 areas: relationship with self, relationship to other people, and relationship to the work that we do. I would ask you to examine where you live as part of that puzzle. It's not just that you're inadequate and shitty in business and you need more books to read and more podcasts to listen to make yourself a better business person. the environment can play a huge impact. In fact, sometimes the environment can be this simple piece of the jigsaw that just needs to click into place and you go, oh my God, I didn't need any more scales. I actually was adequate enough. I am enough, and therefore was the place I live. And I'll just expand very quickly on this in that imagine someone's going, okay, I get that. I'm living in Belfast, or I'm living in Derry, or I'm living in Dublin, I'm living in Cork, wherever you are, or London or Africa or wherever. But Philip, here's the problem, and this is the bullshit line that most people use. I just don't know where I would like to move to. Here's my answer. The answer is anywhere. You have the most important clarity of all. And the clarity that you have is, I know I don't want to be here. Where you move to is irrelevant. The answer is anywhere. They go, well, what if I move to Birmingham and I don't like it? And I go, brilliant. You move to Birmingham, and after 6 months or a year, you go, well, it's not Birmingham. Brilliant. But then, Philip, where do I move? The answer to the question is anywhere. But what if I go to Cape Town? I don't like it. Brilliant. There's 2 or 3 cities off your list. The problem is we're afraid to make a move. And secondly is when we do make a move, we buy a house, buy a puppy, build an extension, etc., etc. And what we do is we imprison ourselves in that place. Or we declare on Facebook, hey, I'm moving to Birmingham for the next 10 years. Why would you do that to yourself? So we're afraid of movement. We're afraid of making mistakes, and yet we're busier now and we move more now than ever. So we're running from ourselves every single day. That's what busyness really for most people actually is. It's not because we're busy, it's because we want to be busy. But we're afraid to make these plays. We're afraid to experiment, to try. Why not rent a house in Birmingham for a month? And just see what it does to your psyche, see what it does to your energy. It is profound. One thing we're really good at, and I'm not very good at many things, very good at, is finding wonderful places to inhabit ourselves. We lived in Vancouver, Edmonton for a brief time, Vancouver, Boulder, Colorado, County Clare, the west coast of Ireland. Like, these are places that just bring you alive. These are places that you wake up, you don't have to write, read, or do anything, and you feel something every single day. And we all have those places in the world. Connor, where in the world is a place that you don't even know why, but it just brings you alive. It heightens your senses, brings out your creativity. Where's a place for you?
New York.
And my curiosity is why? But the answer is it doesn't fucking matter, because once it brings you alive, and what work, what idea, what creation could come out of you in New York in a coffee shop with a pencil and a piece of paper, something about this podcast, something about a future variation of business, relationship, where you want to live, that can come out in New York that cannot come out in Dublin. And I believe that's the key. And I'll contextualize it one other way. I've been told I'm brilliant at asking questions. And that may or may not be true. I spend a lot of time crafting questions, but it's not just the question. The question has a number of components. The quality of the question, the place we ask the question, and the place we ask the question within ourselves. In other words, if I gave you a question today to sit here and ponder, the same question on a tube in London, or the same question in a coffee shop in New York, or the same question on a 5,000-year-old green road on the west coast of Ireland where you haven't had your mobile in your hand for 4 or 5 days, you've got the wind at your back, the wind in your face, the rain on the side of your ears, and you've had wonderful, rich conversation with a group of entrepreneurs, and you're open. Your heart is fucking blown open to the possibilities you simply have not been able to see in your life to date. You tell me where that question is liable to go inside of your body and what answer is able to come out. Therefore, the environment in which we operate in and live in and ask questions of ourselves and are posed questions to is critical. Critical. And it's the thing we overlook the most.
I'm interested to hear, and we're going to finish up in a minute, and thank you, Philip, for coming in and doing this. It's been a pleasure, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. One of the things I was wondering in preparation for this is that you have a coaching business, right? And it's obviously of a certain stage that you're able to get into entrepreneurs organization where you have to reach a certain revenue level and all of that. And if I take the book, The E-Myth, have you read that book?
I know Michael Garber. I met Michael Garber. Well, I think he's passed a number of years ago. I met him at a conference in Calgary, and we had some conversations years ago.
And he has a kind of a very almost unemotional view from that book, is that, everyone kind of gets into business because they love doing something. They're a technician in some way, but they don't become successful as a business unless they basically franchise that, and other people are then delivering what they initially loved doing. And I've always kind of had a problem with it, because I just feel, there's a certain part of doing what you love is kind of the magic of life. But if you're just building a business around it, perhaps that's a different thing. And I'm wondering for you, because clearly you doing the talking and doing the coaching is something you feel that's where you can have the most impact. And I'm just wondering, do you ever think about those two things, about the kind of business side of it versus the Philip McKernan doing it?
No.
Tell me more.
So I think scale, we've become obsessed with scale, and I think scale can be very effective in some cases, and scale can be very, very dangerous for many other people. Scaling a business for the sake of scaling it can be very problematic. I had an entrepreneur who came to the castle last week, and he challenged something he'd been telling himself. He's operated a very successful business. His kids in right now, he's had a sale that his kids don't have to work, and he's an opportunity to double down doing what he's done. So he has multiple generations never have to work. So his kids never have to work, and he has the ability to scale his business and do an even bigger exit. And I challenged him. I said, "Why would you do that?" He said, "Well, so they never have to work." And I would go, "Right. So let's look at that from and this is my job. Let's look at that from a different perspective. The people in my experience, the people who want to build a business and sell it so their children don't have to work, it's a form of selfishness, and it's also a form of protection, because there was something happened to them in the work world they just want to prevent their kids from going into. But one of the challenges about providing enough revenue for kids in the future is that you deprive the kids of their own failures, of their own journey, of their own passion, and you also burden them with the money. I've worked with a lot of people who've inherited a shit ton of money, and it's not all rosy. In fact, it can be deeply dysfunctional. So that man is lost in providing for kids that he's never even going to meet. And yet he's not getting to his kind of core passion. And people have often said, would you not scale? Would you not like coach the coach and not get coaches to do what you do? I mean, I would argue to say, well, why are you interviewing me? Why but you've done 80 interviews at this stage. You should just offload that to somebody else. So why are you doing this?
Because I love it. I would never offload this. And there's actually talk about AI. Why don't you just get an AI to record your voice, and it could be on camera doing all this? And that would just take the complete joy out of it for me. What would be the point in that?
I don't have any aspirations to have people coaching. Now, what I've done is I think about it from a point of impact. How do I make a bigger impact? And I'm one person. So what I did, begrudgingly to some extent, because I've been asked for years, can you teach me how to stand on stage and speak? Even though I'm not a speaker coach. But I love helping people craft a talk that they can go on stage, get paid well for, but more importantly, make an impact. So I do that with entrepreneurs. And then coaching. Coaching is a skill that every leader should have, irrespective of whether they become a coach. So I launched a concept called Brave Coach, where I teach people how to coach people the best way they can. And that way, I'm making a bigger impact, because I'm helping people coach either their teams, their organization, or more people. That's how I think about it. But I don't think about how can I scale my business. I don't think about it that when I'm dead, my business is gone. I think the impact that the work we do is going to live on forever. And I think it'll live on in various different ways. But I don't think about how I can streamline my business, it's just not a conversation that's interesting to me. In fact, I could easily take away a lot of the things I do, deprive myself of joy, which, by the way, most entrepreneurs are geniuses at it. And we didn't even talk about joy today, but we could have. When we bought, like you were at the castle on the West Coast, when we bought that castle, or more importantly, became stewards of that castle, I could have offloaded that to a developer to bring that back to life. And no, primarily me, my wife as well, spent 5 years restoring that place. Maybe not to everyone's liking, but in a way that we felt was respectful for this place now and into its future. I know every corner of that place. I feel every every block, every stone, everything in that place. I know that place intimately. I needed to do that. I wanted to do that. I chose to do that. My intellect, this is where I don't trust my brain at all. My intellect said, offload it and just focus on the business. And it'll all look after itself. But we would not have ended up with a product or a concept or a place that feels so sacred, so beautiful, that is so incredibly conducive to the work that we do. So, yeah, it's not a conversation that I'm having right now, and I don't see myself having that one in the future.
Last night at the dinner, again, a guy we both know, I'll use his first name, Ross, he said about this interview coming up, he said, best of luck in the morning. And he said, what you'll find about Philip is that he lacks intensity. And I think I now realise that he was being sarcastic. So... so it's been a pleasure having you in. I think it runs quite deep with you, right? And I think we could have, as you said, joy, we could have talked about loads of other things. And I don't want to do you a disservice by not mentioning something. Is there anything you feel that you kind of want to say before we finish up that you think people out there might need to hear?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things. I think in the end of the day, if I could ask people to reflect upon one thing and one thing only, is their relationship with themselves. That, we spend a lot of time building our businesses, we a lot of time focusing on strategies and AI and software and marketing and sales and all these different channels. And then when what's left, we tend to focus on those relationships at home. And a lot of us negate this one relationship, this most important relationship, I think, in the world, leaving God aside and religion, whatever you believe in, is our relationship with ourselves. A lot of entrepreneurs don't really like who they are. A lot of entrepreneurs give themselves a really hard time. And then they have the data to prove that giving themselves a hard time actually pushes them to achieve more, which I think is bullshit, because it'll push you to achieve more, but it will never, ever open the door to invite you to do your best work and the work that brings you the most joy. And we therefore over-identify in terms of our achievements. And I would just love you to take a spotlight, take a mirror, and just look at yourself and see where you are as it relates to yourself. Are you a good man? Are you a good woman in this world? And do you feel that you deserve great things in the world? And I think if you're honest, most people would say there's probably a lack of deserving somewhere. And therefore we go out into the world and we drive and we push and we push and we push harder to try to achieve some sense of self and a semblance of self or some sort of significance in the world. And I would love you just to shine a light on yourself and say, how can you be kinder to yourself? How can you bring more joy into yourself? How can you bring more compassion into your own life? And that's not about being soft as putty and being weak. It's actually about creating a core foundation and then making decisions in that place that are more aligned to who you are. And the last thing I'll say is, please, please, please be open to the fact that you are talented in certain ways, but there's most likely you've got a gift that the world has yet to see. You've yet to see. And don't go to your grave with your greatest music, your greatest ideation, your greatest work inside of you, because you're depriving yourself and the world and your children of that part of you, which I think is the greatest tragedy of all.
Philip McKernan, thank you very much for coming in. It's been a very interesting conversation and I'll be listening back to this. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Philip, for coming in.
Appreciate it. Thank you.